Texas, 1875. The unforgiving sun beat down on the dusty plains of Maverick County, where law was more suggestion than mandate, and a man's worth was measured by his grit and the speed of his draw. Danger lurked behind every saloon door, and opportunity beckoned from each untamed horizon. In this harsh landscape, 25-year-old Dustin Blackwell had learned one immutable truth: love was a luxury a cowboy couldn't afford. Dustin adjusted his worn Stetson as he guided his chestnut quarter horse through the tall grass. 6 years working cattle drives had hardened him like the leather of his saddle. He'd seen good men die from snake bites, rustler ambushes, and the merciless elements. He'd watched cowboys abandon ranches to chase women who promised devotion but delivered heartbreak. The West was no place for romance, only survival. "Keep moving, Ember," he murmured to his horse, patting her neck as they approached a creek. The afternoon sun glinted off his lean, muscular frame, highlighting cheekbones sharpened by years of hard work and minimal comforts. Despite the layer of trail dust, his handsome features were unmistakable. A strong jaw lightly stubbled after days on the range, clear blue eyes that missed nothing, and sun-lightened brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. What Dustin wanted was simple: enough money to buy his own spread someday, far from the crowded East where his family had lost everything after the war between the states. What he needed, though he'd never admit it, was something to fill the hollow ache that settled in his chest on quiet nights around the campfire, when older cowboys spoke wistfully of wives and children waiting at home. "That life ain't for men like us," he told Ember, who flicked her ears back as if listening. "We're made for the trail." Dustin had just completed a cattle drive to Kansas and was heading back to the Rocking M Ranch where he'd worked for the past 3 years. The summer had been profitable, and Mr. Mackenzie had promised him a foreman position if this drive went well. It had. Now, with extra money in his pocket and a future mapped out, Dustin felt as settled as a drifter could be. That's when he heard it, a woman's scream piercing the afternoon quiet. Dustin's hand instantly moved to his Colt revolver. Screaming women meant trouble, and trouble meant getting involved in other people's problems. The smart play was to keep riding, yet something in that voice, the raw terror, pulled him toward a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. "Damn it," he muttered, spurring Ember forward. "Just a quick look." As he cleared the trees, Dustin saw an overturned wagon, its canvas cover torn, one wheel splintered beyond repair. A team of horses stood nervously nearby, still in their traces. And there, backed against the creek bank, stood a young woman wielding a broken wagon slat against 2 rough-looking men. "I told you, take what you want from the wagon, but you will not touch me," the woman declared, her voice firm despite her precarious position. "Ain't much worth taking in that wagon," the taller man sneered, stepping closer. "But you, pretty lady, you're worth plenty in the right establishment." Dustin assessed the situation in seconds: 2 armed men against 1 frightened woman. Poor odds for her, but manageable for him if he played it right. The smart decision would be to ride on, these weren't his troubles, and getting shot over a stranger made no sense. Instead, he guided Ember into the clearing, his revolver drawn but resting casually across his saddle horn. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Seems the lady isn't interested in your company." The men spun around, hands hovering near their holsters. "This ain't your concern, cowboy," the shorter one growled, revealing rotted teeth. "Ride on if you know what's good for you." Dustin kept his expression neutral, but his eyes hardened. "I'm making it my concern. The lady stays, you 2 go." Simple enough even for your limited understanding. The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats before the taller man made his move. Dustin fired first, the bullet tearing through the man's shoulder. Before the second attacker could clear his holster, Dustin had cocked and fired again, grazing the man's arm enough to send his gun tumbling to the dirt. "Next ones go through your hearts," Dustin said calmly. "Pick up your friend and ride out. Don't stop until you hit the territory line." The men retreated, cursing but wisely choosing to live another day. As they disappeared into the distance, Dustin finally turned his full attention to the woman. She stood tall despite her ordeal, straight-backed and still gripping her makeshift weapon. Her dress, once a cheerful blue calico, was dust-covered and torn at the hem, but somehow she maintained a dignity that struck him. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 21 or 22, with waves of rich chestnut hair escaping from what had been a neat bun. Her face, heart-shaped and delicate, held the most arresting pair of green eyes he'd ever seen, like spring grass after rain. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, dismounting and approaching slowly. "No, thanks to your timely arrival." She lowered the wagon's slat but didn't discard it entirely. "Smart woman. I'm Victoria Zimmerman." "I appreciate your assistance, Mr. Blackwell, Dustin Blackwell." He tipped his hat, keeping a respectful distance. "What happened here?" Victoria sighed, gesturing to the wrecked wagon. "The wheel broke. I was attempting repairs when those men appeared. They claimed to be offering help, but their intentions quickly became clear." Her voice remained steady, but Dustin noticed her hands trembling slightly. "You're traveling alone?" He couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Not by choice. I was traveling with my uncle to San Antonio, but he passed 3 days ago. Fever took him quickly." Grief flickered across her features. "I decided to continue on rather than turn back." Dustin surveyed the wagon. Even if he could repair the wheel, which was doubtful, the axle had cracked as well. "I'm afraid this wagon isn't going anywhere, Miss Zimmerman." "Mrs." she corrected automatically, then hesitated. "Well, widow now. My husband died at Chancellorsville. It's been 12 years, but habits persist." Dustin nodded, calculating. A young widow, probably married as little more than a girl if her husband died in '63. Still, her status simplified matters. A widow could travel with less scandal than an unmarried woman. "The nearest town is Valverde, about 15 miles south," he offered. "I can escort you there if you'd like." Victoria looked at her ruined wagon, then at the vast emptiness surrounding them. Her shoulders squared as she made her decision. "That would be most appreciated, Mr. Blackwell. Give me a moment to gather my essentials." As she collected her belongings, Dustin found himself oddly fascinated. Most women he'd encountered on the frontier were either hardened by its cruelties or broken by them. Victoria seemed neither. There was a resilience to her, a quiet strength that commanded respect. "What brings you to these parts, Mrs. Zimmerman?" he asked as he helped secure her trunk to Ember's saddle. "A teaching position in San Antonio. The school board specifically requested a widow. Apparently they believe we make the most dedicated teachers, having no family distractions." A faint smile touched her lips. "What they really mean is they want someone with no prospect of marriage to distract her from molding young minds." Dustin found himself returning her smile. "Seems a waste." "I beg your pardon." Heat crept up Dustin's neck. "Just meant it's a shame they're counting on you having no prospects. Doesn't seem fair." "Life seldom is, Mr. Blackwell, particularly for women in the West." She smoothed her skirts with practiced efficiency. "Now shall we proceed to Valverde? I'd rather not be caught in open country after dark." Dustin helped Victoria onto Ember, then mounted behind her. The proper arrangement would have been for him to walk and lead the horse, but propriety took a back seat to safety in the open territory. Still, he maintained as much distance as the saddle allowed, acutely aware of her proximity. As they rode south, Dustin found himself increasingly conscious of Victoria's gentle weight against him, the faint lavender scent that somehow persisted despite her ordeal, and the surprising ease of their conversation. She spoke of her teaching experiences in Missouri, her journey west, and her hopes for her new position. Dustin, normally guarded, found himself sharing stories of cattle drives and frontier life. "You've never considered settling down?" she asked as Valverde's distant buildings appeared on the horizon. "A cowboy's life doesn't lend itself to permanence," he replied automatically. "Besides, what kind of life could I offer a wife? Danger, loneliness, and a man who's gone more than he's home." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Perhaps the right woman might find value in things beyond material comforts. Something in her tone made Dustin grateful she couldn't see his face. "Maybe so, but I haven't met that woman." The lie felt strange on his tongue. Valverde welcomed them with the suspicious scrutiny typical of small frontier towns. The modest hotel had a single vacant room, which Dustin secured for Victoria before arranging his own accommodations at the livery. He promised to check on her in the morning and help arrange transportation to San Antonio. That night, stretched out on hay that smelled infinitely better than most places he'd slept, Dustin found himself unable to dismiss Victoria from his thoughts. She was heading to San Antonio tomorrow, and he was due back at the Rocking M. Their paths had crossed for a brief moment, nothing more than a chance encounter that would soon be forgotten. So why did the thought of their impending separation leave him restless? Morning brought unwelcome news. The stagecoach to San Antonio had departed the previous day and wouldn't return for a week. The town had no horses for sale or rent, a situation the livery owner attributed to a recent purchase by the cavalry. "I can't possibly impose on you further," Victoria protested when Dustin suggested escorting her to San Antonio himself. They stood outside the general store where she'd been replenishing her supplies. "It's hardly an imposition. San Antonio is on my way back to the ranch." Another lie, as it would add 3 days to his journey, but one that came easily. "Besides, it wouldn't be right to leave you stranded." Victoria studied him, those remarkable green eyes seeming to see more than he intended to reveal. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Blackwell, truly?" The question caught him off guard. Why was he helping her? Because it was the decent thing to do, certainly, because she needed assistance, because out here we look after each other, he finally said. "That's all there is to it." Her smile suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but she nodded. "Then I accept your escort with gratitude." The journey to San Antonio took 4 days through territory that grew increasingly settled. They established a routine, riding through the day, making camp before sunset, sharing simple meals and increasingly personal conversations by the campfire. Dustin learned of Victoria's childhood in Kentucky, her brief marriage at 16 to a man 12 years her senior, and her struggles to create a life for herself after widowhood. In turn, he found himself revealing parts of his past he rarely discussed. His family's lost plantation, his father's death shortly after the war, his mother's struggle to keep the family together before her own passing. How he'd headed west at 19 with nothing but determination and the skills his father had taught him. On the third night, as they sat beside a small fire, Victoria asked the question Dustin had been dreading. "What happened to make you so certain love has no place in your life?" He stared into the flames, considering deflection before sighing. "I watched my father die of a broken heart after losing everything he'd built. I saw my mother work herself to death trying to provide for us kids. I've buried friends who took foolish risks to impress women, and I've seen good men abandon the trail to chase dreams of family, only to end up broken when reality didn't match their hopes." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night. "Love is a luxury, Mrs. Zimmerman. Out here, it's a distraction that gets people killed." Victoria was quiet so long that Dustin thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "I think you're wrong, Mr. Blackwell. Love isn't a luxury, it's the thing that makes hardship bearable. Without it, what are we surviving for?" Her words lingered in the silence between them, challenging everything Dustin had convinced himself was true. The next day they arrived in San Antonio. The school was an impressive 2-story building near the town square, and the school board chairman, a portly man named Wilkins, greeted Victoria with obvious relief. "We feared something had happened when you didn't arrive on schedule," he explained, eyeing Dustin with barely concealed suspicion. "Mr. Blackwell rescued me from a most unfortunate situation," Victoria said. "I owe him a great debt." "Yes, well," Wilkins cleared his throat. "We've prepared accommodations for you at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. It's for ladies only, very respectable. Classes begin in 3 days." The moment of parting arrived too quickly. Standing in the street outside the school, Dustin found himself searching for words. "I suppose this is where we say goodbye," Victoria said, her hands clasped before her. "I suppose it is," he shifted uncomfortably. "You'll be all right here." "I always land on my feet, Mr. Blackwell." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for your protection and your company. It's a journey I won't soon forget." Dustin nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Zimmerman." He mounted Ember, tipped his hat once more, and rode away without looking back. The hollow feeling in his chest, he told himself, was simply exhaustion from the journey. The rocking M welcomed Dustin back with the familiar rhythm of ranch life. Mr. Mackenzie made good on his promise of a foreman position, which meant more responsibility and higher wages. It should have been everything Dustin wanted, a step closer to his own spread, respect from his fellow cowboys, and the security of regular employment. Yet as summer faded into fall, Dustin found himself increasingly restless. He caught himself staring toward San Antonio during night watches, wondering if Victoria was adjusting to her new life, if she'd found the purpose she sought. Wondering, despite his best efforts not to, if she ever thought of him. "You've been mighty distracted lately," observed Charlie, an older cowhand who'd been with the Rocking M since its founding. They were repairing fence line, a tedious but necessary task. "Just focused on the work," Dustin replied, driving a post into the hard ground with more force than necessary. Charlie snorted. "Son, I've known you 3 years, and I've never seen you miss the signs of a lame horse or fail to notice a hawk circling over calving grounds. But yesterday, you rode right past that broken section by the East Creek without so much as a glance." Dustin wiped sweat from his brow. "What's your point?" "My point is, whatever, or whoever, has got your attention, maybe you ought to do something about it instead of beating the hell out of fence posts." Before Dustin could respond, a rider approached from the direction of the ranch house. It was Jimmy, one of the younger hands. "Mr. Mackenzie wants you back at the house," Jimmy called. "Says there's a situation in San Antonio needs handling." Dustin's heart thundered in his chest. "What kind of situation?" "Don't rightly know, something about cattle buyers and contracts. He just said to fetch you quick." The situation turned out to be a lucrative opportunity. A San Antonio hotel owner was looking to secure a regular beef supply for his establishment and had approached the Rocking M based on reputation. Mr. Mackenzie wanted Dustin to ride to San Antonio, negotiate terms, and oversee the first delivery. "Should take about 2 weeks all told," Mackenzie explained. "You'll need to stay in San Antonio a few days to make sure everything's satisfactory. Think you can handle it?" Dustin nodded, hoping his eagerness wasn't too obvious. "I'll head out at first light." That night, packing his saddlebags, Dustin tried to temper his expectations. San Antonio was a growing city. The chances of encountering Victoria were slim, and even if he did, what then? She had her life, he had his. Their paths had crossed briefly, nothing more. Yet as he rode toward San Antonio the next morning, Dustin couldn't ignore the lightness in his chest, a feeling dangerously close to hope. The negotiations went smoothly. The hotel owner, impressed by Dustin's straightforward manner and knowledge of the cattle business, agreed to terms favorable to the Rocking M. With the first delivery scheduled for the following month, Dustin found himself with 2 days to spare before he needed to start back to the ranch. 2 days in San Antonio. He told himself he was merely being polite when he asked a shopkeeper for directions to the school. Just paying a social call on someone who'd shared his trail briefly, nothing more. The schoolhouse bustled with afternoon activity when Dustin arrived. Children spilled out the front doors, laughing and shouting as they headed home. He waited at a respectful distance, hat in hand, scanning the departing students for any sign of their teacher. When Victoria finally emerged, locking the school doors behind her, Dustin's carefully rehearsed greeting abandoned him. She wore a simple gray dress with a white collar, her chestnut hair neatly pinned back, looking every inch the proper schoolteacher. Yet there was a brightness about her, a vitality that the formal attire couldn't diminish. She turned and saw him, freezing mid-step. For a moment her expression remained carefully neutral, then broke into a smile that transformed her face. "Mr. Blackwell, what a surprise." Dustin found his voice at last. "Mrs. Zimmerman. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she approached, adjusting the stack of books in her arms. "What brings you to San Antonio?" "Business for the ranch," he gestured to her books. "May I?" She relinquished them gratefully, and they fell into step together down the street. Dustin explained his mission while Victoria told him about her first months of teaching. "The children are wonderful, eager to learn, if somewhat wild. Many have never had formal education before." "And are you settling in well?" He studied her profile, noting how animation had replaced the weariness he remembered from their journey. "I am. Mrs. Hollister's boarding house is comfortable if somewhat restrictive. No gentlemen callers, strict curfews. She runs it like a convent." Victoria laughed softly. "But the work is fulfilling. I feel useful here." They reached the boarding house too quickly. A 3-story building with a wide porch, it exuded respectability from every polished window. "Would you?" Dustin cleared his throat. "That is, if you're not otherwise engaged, would you allow me to escort you to dinner tomorrow evening, to thank you properly for your company during our journey?" Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. I believe it was I who owed you thanks, Mr. Blackwell. Dustin, he corrected, and perhaps we can agree that no thanks are necessary on either side. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I would be delighted, Dustin. Shall we say 6 o'clock? 6 it is. He handed back her books, tipped his hat, and departed before his grin could give away just how much her acceptance meant to him. Dinner at San Antonio's finest restaurant proved more enjoyable than Dustin could have imagined. Victoria arrived in a dress of deep emerald that matched her eyes, her hair arranged in an elegant style that softened her features. Their conversation flowed naturally from school matters to ranch life, from books Victoria was teaching to Dustin's plans for eventual property ownership. You should see the land north of the Rocking M, he said, warming to his favorite subject. There's a valley with year-round water and enough grazing for 500 head. Pine trees along the ridges for building, good protection from winter winds. It sounds wonderful, Victoria said softly. You speak of it with such passion. Dustin felt suddenly self-conscious. Just a dream for now, takes money to buy land and I'm still saving. Dreams are important, they give us direction. Victoria sipped her wine. My students have such grand dreams, doctors, lawyers, ranchers. Some will achieve them, others won't. But the dreaming itself shapes them. What about you? Is teaching in San Antonio your dream? Something flickered in her expression. It's a good position, respectable work for a woman in my situation. That's not what I asked. Victoria set down her glass carefully. When I was a girl, I dreamed of adventure, traveling to exotic places, seeing the world beyond Kentucky. Then I married and my dreams changed to match my husband's. After he died, I had to create new dreams from practical necessities. She met his gaze directly. Teaching isn't my dream, Dustin, it's my anchor. It gives me purpose and security. And what would you dream if security wasn't a concern? The question hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. I would dream of a life with meaning beyond mere existence. Of building something lasting, she smiled faintly. Perhaps not so different from your valley with the year-round water. After dinner, Dustin walked Victoria back to her boarding house. The night air carried a hint of autumn crispness, and stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. I leave for the ranch tomorrow, Dustin said as they approached the boarding house. I suspected as much. Victoria stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Will you return to San Antonio soon? The first cattle delivery is scheduled for next month. I'll be overseeing it. I see, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. In that case, I shall wish you safe travels, Mr. Blackwell. Dustin hesitated, then took her hand gently. I've enjoyed your company tremendously, Victoria, more than I can properly express. And I yours, her voice was barely above a whisper. Without overthinking, Dustin raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Until next month. The ride back to the Rocking M seemed longer than the journey to San Antonio had been. Dustin found himself replaying every moment of his time with Victoria, her smile across the dinner table, the way she described her students, the fleeting sadness in her eyes when discussing dreams. He told himself he was being foolish. What future could possibly exist between a cowboy saving for a distant ranch and a respectable schoolteacher building a new life? Yet when Mr. Mackenzie asked for a volunteer to handle the monthly deliveries to San Antonio, Dustin's hand shot up before the question was fully voiced. October brought the first delivery to the San Antonio hotel. Dustin spent 3 days in the city, 2 of which included dinner with Victoria. November's delivery coincided with a school pageant, which Dustin attended at Victoria's invitation, watching with undisguised pride as she directed her students through a historical presentation. December found them sharing a carriage ride through San Antonio's Christmas festivities, Victoria's gloved hand resting comfortably in Dustin's. With each visit, their connection deepened. Victoria introduced Dustin to her favorite bookshop, where he purchased his first book of poetry, something he would have ridiculed months earlier. Dustin taught Victoria to ride properly, leading her on increasingly adventurous excursions outside the city during his visits. They exchanged letters between deliveries, Victoria's eloquent and thoughtful, Dustin's earnest and increasingly open about his feelings. By February, Dustin had saved nearly enough for a down payment on the valley property he coveted. Yet his dreams had expanded to include a house with bookshelves for Victoria's growing collection, perhaps children's laughter someday. Dreams he hadn't dared acknowledge even to himself. Then came March, and everything changed. Dustin arrived in San Antonio for the monthly delivery to discover the school closed unexpectedly. Concerned, he headed to the boarding house, only to be met with Mrs. Hollister's tight-lipped disapproval. "Mrs. Zimmerman is no longer a resident of this establishment," the older woman informed him. "I suggest you inquire with Mr. Wilkins at the school board." Alarmed, Dustin tracked down Wilkins at his law office. The man's expression soured at the mention of Victoria's name. "Mrs. Zimmerman's services were terminated last week," he said stiffly. "The board has certain standards of conduct for our teachers, particularly widows who must be above reproach. Her association with a certain cowboy was deemed inappropriate." Cold fury washed through Dustin. "Are you saying she lost her position because of me?" Wilkins straightened papers on his desk. "I'm saying that unmarried teachers may not entertain male callers or engage in unchaperoned outings. Mrs. Zimmerman was aware of these conditions when she accepted the position." "Where is she now?" "I'm not at liberty to say." Dustin leaned across the desk, his voice dangerously quiet. "Mr. Wilkins, I have spent the last 5 days driving cattle across rough country with minimal sleep. My patience, which was never my strongest quality, is completely exhausted. Now you can tell me where Victoria is, or I can tear this town apart looking for her. Your choice." Wilkins swallowed. She took a room at the Imperial Hotel while seeking new employment. "But I warn you, sir, any further impropriety will permanently damage her reputation in this community." Dustin found Victoria in the hotel's modest dining room, staring into a cup of tea. She looked up as he approached, and the mixture of joy and distress in her expression nearly undid him. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly as he sat across from her. "It will only make matters worse." "I just heard what happened. Victoria, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," she offered a wan smile. "I knew the rules, I chose to break them." "Because of me." "Because I wanted to, because for the first time since my husband died, I felt truly alive." She reached across the table, briefly touching his hand before withdrawing. "I don't regret our time together, Dustin, but perhaps it's best if we marry me." The words emerged without premeditation, surprising Dustin as much as Victoria, whose eyes widened. "What did you say?" Dustin leaned forward, suddenly certain. "Marry me, Victoria. I have nearly enough saved for land of my own. We could build a life together, a real life, not just existing. You could have your school on the ranch for neighboring children. We could create something meaningful, something lasting." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Dustin, you can't possibly." "I love you," the truth of it rang through him like a bell. "I've been fighting it since the day I met you, telling myself all the reasons it couldn't work, shouldn't work. But I'm done fighting. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend my life proving that love isn't just a luxury, it's essential." For a moment, hope bloomed in Victoria's expression, then faded to resignation. "You don't understand. There's something I haven't told you, something that changes everything. Nothing could change how I feel. This will," she took a deep breath. "Dustin, I haven't been entirely truthful about my past, my husband. Henry was a Confederate officer, yes, but he didn't die at Chancellorsville." Confusion creased Dustin's brow. "I don't understand." "Henry deserted after Chancellorsville. He came home, took what money we had, and disappeared. There were rumors he'd gone west, perhaps to Mexico." Victoria's hands trembled slightly. "I never saw him again, but legally I remain married to him." The revelation hit Dustin like a physical blow. "You're still married." "Unless Henry is dead, yes, I've had no confirmation either way." She met his gaze directly. "I came west partly hoping to learn his fate, to finally be free, but I've found nothing. That's why teaching positions for widows were perfect, no one questioned too deeply." Dustin sat back, processing this new reality. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "At first it didn't matter. You were simply a kind stranger helping me reach San Antonio. Later, when things began to change between us, I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me differently, afraid to acknowledge my own feelings when I had no right to them. A tear slipped down her cheek. I should have told you I'm sorry. The revelation should have cooled Dustin's feelings, should have confirmed his lifelong belief that love was too complicated, too dangerous to risk. Instead, he found himself reaching for her hand again. We'll find him, or proof of what happened to him, then we'll move forward together. Dustin, you can't. I can and I will, his resolve hardened. I meant what I said, Victoria. I love you, this changes the timing, not the destination. Hope flickered in her eyes. What are you suggesting? Come back to the Rocking M with me. We'll tell Mr. Mackenzie you're a teacher looking to establish a school for the ranch children and neighboring farms. It's the truth, just not all of it. While you teach, I'll make inquiries about Henry. Texas is full of former Confederate soldiers. Someone must know something. And if they don't, then we expand the search. But we do it together, he squeezed her hand. What do you say? 2 weeks later, Victoria Zimmerman arrived at the Rocking M Ranch as the new schoolteacher for the growing community of ranch families. Mr. Mackenzie, delighted by the prospect of education for the children without a long daily ride to town, provided a small cabin near the main house. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows but no serious objections. Victoria's impeccable manners and genuine passion for teaching quickly won over even the most suspicious ranch wives. Dustin threw himself into 2 missions, saving for his land and searching for information about Henry Zimmerman. Letters went out to Confederate veteran associations, notices were posted in papers across the Southwest, and Dustin questioned every traveler passing through about a deserter who might have headed to Mexico. Months passed, spring blossomed into summer. Victoria's small school grew from 8 students to 15 as word spread. Dustin was promoted to head foreman after Mr. Mackenzie suffered a riding accident. Their lives settled into a rhythm that felt both temporary and oddly permanent. Separate cabins, shared meals with the ranch community, professional respect in public, and quiet conversations on the porch steps after sunset. Then in late July, a letter arrived from Laredo. Dustin found Victoria at the schoolhouse preparing lessons for the fall term. The sealed envelope felt heavy in his hand. It's from a sheriff in Laredo, he explained, handing it to her. Responding to one of my notices. Victoria stared at the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. You read it, please. Dustin broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. The message was brief and clear. In response to your inquiry, Henry Zimmerman, formerly of Kentucky, died in Laredo Prison, January 1869. Hanged for murder and theft, death certificate on file. Body buried in prisoner's plot, unmarked grave. Sorry for your loss. Sheriff J.T. Harding. Victoria closed her eyes, absorbing the news in silence. When she opened them again, they shimmered with unshed tears. 6 years, she whispered. He's been dead 6 years, while I've been living in limbo. Dustin moved closer, uncertain whether to offer comfort or space. I'm sorry, Victoria, for everything you've endured. Don't be, she looked up at him, her expression clearing. I mourned the man I married long ago when he abandoned me. This is freedom, closure. They stood in silence, the letter between them representing an end and a beginning. I'll need to obtain the death certificate, Victoria said practically. To make it official. We can ride to Laredo next week, Dustin offered, together. The journey to Laredo took 3 days. They traveled with a small wagon train for safety, but maintained the careful propriety that had characterized their relationship at the ranch. The death certificate was obtained without difficulty, the sheriff confirming the details of Henry's crime, a barroom robbery gone wrong, and his subsequent execution. On the return journey, camped away from the main group for privacy, Victoria finally allowed herself to weep, not for the man who had betrayed her, but for the years lost to uncertainty. Dustin held her as the tears subsided, his arms a shelter in the wilderness. When she grew quiet, he gently tilted her face toward his. Victoria Zimmerman, he said softly, when we return to the Rocking M, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to know that I'll accept whatever answer you give, and it won't change how I feel about you. She searched his face in the firelight. Why wait? Ask me now. Because I want to do this properly. Not on the trail, not while the past is still so fresh. When we return, when you've had time to think clearly. Victoria smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Always the honorable man. Very well, I'll wait for your question. They returned to the Rocking M as August ripened toward harvest. The death certificate was filed with the county clerk, officially ending Victoria's marriage. 3 days later, Dustin asked for a private meeting with Mr. Mackenzie. The older man listened thoughtfully to Dustin's proposition. You're sure about this, son? Running your own spread is different from managing someone else's. I'm sure, sir. I've saved enough for the down payment, and the bank's willing to finance the rest based on my experience and references. Mackenzie nodded slowly. You're the best foreman I've had, hate to lose you. But a man deserves his own land. He extended his hand. You have my blessing and a standing offer to return if things don't work out. The next evening, Dustin invited Victoria for a ride. They traveled north, beyond the boundaries of the Rocking M, until they reached a valley cradled between pine-covered ridges. A creek meandered through lush grassland, catching the late afternoon sun like scattered gold coins. Dustin helped Victoria dismount, then led her to a large oak at the valley's center. Its spreading branches created a natural shelter, its roots extending toward the creek. This is it, he said simply. The valley I told you about that first dinner in San Antonio. 500 acres of the best grazing land in the county. Victoria turned slowly, taking in the natural beauty surrounding them. It's even more magnificent than you described. I signed the papers this morning. It's mine or will be once I make 20 years of payments. Dustin smiled wryly. I've named it the Double Heart Ranch. It's perfect. Victoria's gaze softened as she looked at him. You've achieved your dream. Part of it, Dustin took her hands in his. Victoria, these past months have taught me something I never thought possible. Love isn't a luxury or a distraction. It's the foundation everything else is built upon. Without it, this land would just be property, not a home. He knelt before her, still holding her hands. I promised myself I'd wait until you were truly free and we were standing on land that could be ours together. Victoria Zimmerman, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you build this dream with me, create a home and a life that's meaningful and lasting? Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, Dustin Blackwell, 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 weeks later in the Rocking M's main house, with Mr. Mackenzie giving the bride away and the entire ranch community in attendance. Victoria wore a dress of ivory silk ordered specially from San Antonio, with wildflowers in her chestnut hair. Dustin, uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number. As evening deepened, the newlyweds slipped away, riding beneath a canopy of stars toward their future home. A small cabin awaited them, hastily constructed by the Rocking M hands as a wedding gift, simple but sound. Inside, lamplight revealed a bed with a handmade quilt from the ranch wives, a small table with 2 chairs, and a shelf already holding Victoria's beloved books. It's not much, Dustin said apologetically, lifting Victoria across the threshold. Just temporary until I can build you a proper house. Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck. It's everything I need, you're everything I need. Later, as moonlight filtered through the cabin's single window, Victoria rested her head on Dustin's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. When I was trapped against that creek bank with those 2 men approaching, I thought my journey west had been a terrible mistake, she murmured. I never imagined it would lead me to the greatest blessing of my life. Dustin stroked her hair, marveling at how completely his worldview had transformed. I spent years believing love was a weakness a cowboy couldn't afford. Turns out, it's the greatest strength I've ever known. Victoria propped herself up to look at him. Do you know why I fell in love with you, Dustin Blackwell? My rugged good looks, he teased. Because beneath all that cowboy stoicism beats a heart capable of extraordinary tenderness. You may have convinced yourself that love had no place in your life, but your actions always told a different story. She traced his jawline gently. You risked your life for a stranger, shared your journey with a woman of uncertain background, and then moved heaven and earth to help me find freedom. Dustin pulled her closer. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. I know, she smiled. That's why I love you. Under a Texas sky vast with possibilities, Dustin and Victoria Blackwell began their life together on the Double Heart Ranch. The years that followed brought challenges typical of frontier life: drought seasons, harsh winters, the constant work of building a cattle operation from scratch. They faced each obstacle together, drawing strength from the love they'd found against all odds. In time, the small cabin gave way to a proper ranch house with a wide porch and rooms that gradually filled with children's laughter. First a son with Dustin's blue eyes and determined chin, then twin daughters who inherited Victoria's chestnut hair and quick intelligence. The original schoolhouse expanded to accommodate children from neighboring ranches, with Victoria continuing to teach even as her own family grew. On their 10th anniversary, Dustin led Victoria back to the oak tree where he'd proposed. The Double Heart Ranch had prospered beyond their early dreams. The herd now numbered over 1,000 head, the house was one of the finest in the county, and their children were growing strong and capable in the life their parents had built. "Did you ever imagine we'd come this far?" Victoria asked as they spread a picnic beneath the tree's protective canopy. Dustin looked out over their domain, the grazing cattle, the distant roofline of their home, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Texas sky. "I never imagined loving anyone the way I love you," he replied honestly. "Everything else, the ranch, our children, the life we've built, it all stems from that. You changed my mind about what matters, Victoria. You showed me that the greatest strength a man can have is the courage to open his heart." Victoria smiled, the years having only enhanced her beauty. "And you showed me that dreams can be rebuilt, that second chances are possible even when all seems lost." As twilight gathered around them, Dustin held his wife close, gratitude filling his heart. The young cowboy who once believed love was a dangerous distraction had discovered its truth instead. Love was the foundation that made all other dreams possible, the shelter that made the harsh frontier not just survivable, but truly worth living. Against all odds, in the most unexpected place, a chance encounter on a dusty Texas trail, Dustin Blackwell had found not just love but home.